Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? This video is going to be a response to Dark Age of role-playing games and his video, Why Am I Homebrewing My Favorite Games? This video, his whole channel, Jason in general, it just makes me smile because I see so much of myself in him. We have really, really similar stories, remarkably similar stories in terms of like when we started gaming, what games we started playing, when we stopped gaming, when we returned to gaming, what games we encountered at that point, what our reaction was, and then kind of like where we are now, more or less. Even to the point like this is kind of the same years, the same same periods in our lives, the same years because we are of an age. I believe I'm a little older. Um, and it's funny though because I kind of see like he's at the place that I was maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago, in terms of he's kind of at this fork in the road. Like which way do I go? What do I pursue? And we may end up in different places, but it's just really kind of entertaining and fun. And I have a lot of identification with him. So yeah, I really enjoyed the brief interchanges we've had and watching his videos. So he made this video, and I want to do a response to it because I believe in the video he's kind of conflating a few different issues, which is very, very easy to do, and I have done this, so it's not like a criticism. But I kind of want to tease those apart and give my perspective on it. And he said something which I'm going to get to near the end of this video, where he said, first and foremost, these are games and not about role playing. And I wanted to, that's very telling. That's a very telling statement. So I wanted to give my own take on that. But anyhow, let's back up. First, I think it's important when you're talking about house ruling these games, because he's talking about like maybe I should just play things rules as written and stop house ruling. First thing is, yeah, I believe it's very important to separate Dungeons and Dragons, and particularly old or OSR and D&D, from the other games when you're talking about this. Um, so, clearly you play games like, that different games, new games to you, and you just don't have any experience in those games, those systems. It doesn't matter if it's World of Darkness or Ubiquity or 7th Sea 2nd Edition or 7th Sea 1st Edition or Fantasy Flight Star Wars or D6 Star Wars or whatever, right? You have never experienced that particular game or system. It's important to play these games rules as written to see what they're like, you know. Um, and here's a couple of reasons why. Not only, if it's me, because let's talk about me. Not only did I not have a frame of reference for these other games, just never played them. So how could I house rule them until I knew what they did, what the intentions were, what the play was going to be like. But even just as important is I already have a frame of reference for role playing and other games, the games that I grew up with, the games that I know, the feel they produce. And if we're not careful as role players, I think when we learn a new game, it's really, really easy to kind of want to make or change the new game to be more like the old games that we know and love. We want that same experience. And so if we're not careful, we want that old shoe feeling. And so that's one of those, another reason why it's really, really, to me, important to resist the urge to house rule something that's brand new. So you want to see what they actually produce. Eventually you get comfortable enough with a new system, a new game, where you can start to make judgment calls. And I don't mean change the rules or house rule, just where it's a little bit ambiguous, or what should I do in this particular case. You get a feel for it, and it's been really interesting to see, like this all-for-one regime Diabolique, 4 game master game we're involved in. It's been really cool to see how the different game masters have made judgment calls every once in a while, where the rules are it's just a little bit ambiguous. What should you do in this case? What ability should you use here? Or what do the rules actually say here? And sometimes maybe Anthony can offer some insight, and sometimes he's got I can tell he's kind of like hanging back and seeing what's the other guy going to do here. And I haven't got a chance to run it yet for that group. I've run Ubiquity Games a few times. It's fun too to see, in my own head thinking, I think I made this call here. And is it going to be monumentally different? No. But it kind of reflects like my perspective, and it's reflecting their perspectives, what our takes are, what's salient, what the salient point at that moment is for each one of us. But we're not really house ruling. We're just learning how to use the system, make judgment calls, and become a lot more familiar with it. And that happens in every single game. This game, it's kind of this experience though with watching the other game masters. And here I am digressing in this video, which I want to be really direct. I cut this video once; it was too long. But it's kind of like this accelerated experience for me, as far as like learning all from one, watching, on Ubiquity, watching all these other game masters, kind of learn it or make rulings, that sort of thing. Let's go back to D&D. I don't want to make this a D&D video, but it's clear that Jason and I have very similar experiences, so that's what we grew up playing, and especially OSR D&D. So as for D&D, all Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion, are sets of house rules for OD&D, the original Dungeons and Dragons 1974. So I divide this up a little bit. I don't want to make this a D&D video, but like something like, third edition D&D 3.5 and then Pathfinder, which is not legally Dungeons and Dragons, but that is D20 D&D when it comes right down to it. They had to change a few names, but that's what that game is. And then you got a game like fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, a totally different animal. Both these games, they're these sets of codified rules to kind of cover everything. They do it in their own ways. But the older versions of D&D did not cover everything with the rules. So these kind of are games that are designed to produce a specific effect. And I wouldn't mess with those if I were to run them. I wouldn't run them, but because they're kind of like Jenga towers. You pull too much stuff out and the whole thing collapses because they're designed the way they are on purpose. Now, old OSR D&D is a bit different. Because it really wasn't designed that much on purpose. Some of the retro clones are based on a specific version or era of Dungeons and Dragons. So you've got something like Labyrinth Lord, which is supposed to be BX. It's based, it's almost word for word. You got that Iron Falcon game that Jason ran for us the other day. Now that's like Greyhawk. That's like original D&D plus the Greyhawk supplements. That's what the rules suggest at that point. If you want that experience, like what would it be like to play that game then? It's 1975. Sure, you can change stuff, which I'm an advocate of, but you have to be careful of what you change. Like, for example, you're talking about, like, say, the difference between Labyrinth Lord and that Iron Falcon. Ability scores did not mean all that much in early D&D until about 1981 when it came to Basic. So once again, Labyrinth Lord, the ability scores started to get much more codified, and if you had a score of 13, it gave you a +1, etc. I'm not going to go into all of it. Or maybe like 1978 if you're talking about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because the line did kind of split. The ability score started to mean more. Before that, 1974 to like 1978, that didn't mean a heck of a lot, maybe at the top and bottom end. But that was about it. So, different feel. So if you want that feel of that era, then you have to be careful about what you change. Other than that, though, these are very modular games, so I'm not afraid to change them. And I made videos about that, so I don't want to spend too much time here about that either. Definitely, Dark Age said, you choose the game that fits you best, maybe the OSR game that fits you best. However, to me, that may mean that you may have to change a resolution mechanic or two, or maybe just the tone of the game a little bit if you want to. Something like, Lamentations of the Flame Princess is probably my favorite OSR retro clone. However, given my druthers, if I ran it again, which I'm hoping to, I'd change the saving throws to the ones in something like Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, because they're much more elegant. Does it change the game that much? No, they're more elegant. I like the tests of strength or tests of intelligence or extraordinary feats of wisdom or of constitution in that game as well, Astonishing Swordsman. So I'd probably add them into the game because I like them. They're cool. Maybe even something like the death saves for a basic fantasy role-playing game, which is an optional rule in basic fantasy role-playing game. Some of the games even come with optional rules. You can do this or not do it. Now, sometimes the effects of these changes, these little modular fixes to like an OSR game to make it work more the way you want it to, sometimes the mechanical effects are small, sometimes they're big, but they're almost always psychologically satisfying, and I think that's why we do them, which is fine. But these games are meant to be open to a large degree. Sometimes the clone or the original game will say it right in the opening text. But if you believe the stories from the people that were there back in the day, guys like Gary Gygax and what have you, they were confused when people said, well, why, what should I do here? What should I do there? What should the rule for this situation be? Because they're like, why would you want us to make up the entire game for you? We're just giving you this framework. You make it up. I don't care if that story is apocryphal or not, but that's just kind of how these games have been for a long time. So that's talking about OSR D&D and why it's less of an issue for me. Even games like Ubiquity, I've noticed, have some optional rules, not necessarily in the text, although, like, say, All for One has optional rules for blade fodder, for minion rules, pretty much one hit and they're dead. But the supplements, especially from AAA's games, there's a lot of great optional rules in there. You can use them, things for like handling mass opponents, or for scene framing in combat, or for social resource experience points. Leagues of Adventure is a great method to do that, which you can translate to any other Ubiquity games. Those are really, really cool. You don't necessarily have to use them, but those optional rules are out there. Are they house rules or tweaks at that point? I don't think so. I think that most of them are designed to make the game play faster and slicker. So up to you whether you want to use them or not. Now, this is very different from changing rules on the fly or in the moment, which is a completely different topic, and you kind of insert it in there. I'm calling this the Cervantes dies rule. So when you're changing rules on the fly, in the moment, in order to produce or force a desired effect or outcome, generally when the rules or the dice rolls have produced something that's unsatisfying to you, to me, this is, you know, something that's disappointing. To me, this is not okay. I definitely, you know, if you're doing that, my opinion is you shouldn't do it. You're not experiencing the game as it's written at all. Because at that point, like, you know, Cervantes dies. You know, my character first round of combat, we open the dungeon door, Goblin kills him, dead. That's the end of it. But that was according to the rules. Now we changed the rule right then, and as Jason said, we introduced a death save from another game, like, say, you know, imported death save from 5th edition D&D. At that point, well, you know what? Now we've just changed the game midstream to force an outcome because we didn't like the real outcome that happened. Now, this is a lot different than like before the game starts. You know, he hasn't pressed play on Hangouts yet, or maybe we're talking before we decide the game has started now. He said, hey, you want to make this a little bit less deadly and have a death save in there? At that point, maybe house rule it there. To me, that's acceptable because prior to the unfortunate event, we've decided, you know what, we kind of want a little bit different tone for this game. So that's my opinion on that. And let's see. Let's getting back to this, like, you know, statement that Jason made earlier on, or I kind of quoted. I think it was in the middle of his video. He talked about the idea that these are first and foremost games, and they're not first and foremost about role playing. So he you know, his concern was, like, maybe I should start treating these more like games and, you know, following the rules. And to me, that depends on your perspective. It depends on your preferences. It depends on your motivations. It depends on your intention when you're playing role-playing games. This is language that I did not possess some time ago, and I've really just kind of picked up over the past couple of years. I've realized some things about myself that, to me, they're not first and foremost games. I don't not enjoy games. I like games, but I have some friends, and you probably have some friends like this too. Maybe you are one of these people. You really like games, like all games. Games of strategy, games like board games, card games, the whole 9 yards, just pitting your wits against somebody else. I'm not one of those people. I like games to a certain extent, but I am not enthusiastic about them. And it is not about the winning and losing and the numbers for me. To me, you know, I think it's more about a shared narrative experience with other people. And that's not to say that I'm a narrativist. I think I'm somebody that's much more of like games that produce a simulationist effect. That is, okay, what is it? If this fictional world is real and my character is real, maybe, you know, it's an avatar of me, but more likely it's somebody completely different than me. What would it be like to be this person in this particular world? You know, what would they do? I like games that produce sort of that feel, and with other people, because now what it's going to be like interacting with their characters, what happens. I'm really enjoying the experience we're having in the All for One Regime Jam Elite game, because we're figuring out who these characters are, how they interact with each other. It's been really interesting. They have, you know, 4 very different people developing these different relationships with each other and with the world as the world expands. And this, you know, the world it's essentially 17th century France, but with a serious twist. And so I'm really digging that. But that's what it is for me. It's not so much a game. Am I completely not about the numbers? Hell no. You know, hopefully I get to cut this video about my recap about our game last night with Francois, or a couple nights ago with Francois running it. I'm really into that because I have these experience points left over, and like, how am I going to customize Philippe this time? What am I going to do? And it's a bit of a dilemma, you know. So I don't want to give all that stuff away, but yeah, I'm into system mastery. But it's not about the game. It's not first and foremost a game to me. And last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about this 5th edition Kumbaya stuff. Jason mentioned the idea that he's order the 5th edition hardback books. He's lucky. He's got some guys in his area which he's already kind of connected with and clicked with that are running 5th edition D&D, which I think is great. It is a game that I think I'm where he was, or I was where he is right now. Maybe like 2 years ago, year and a half, where I started giving serious consideration. Maybe I'm gonna have to acquiesce and just buy those rule books and start playing that game to kind of cast a wider net and play with more people. And it's something that maybe one day I'll buy the books, you know, or maybe one day I'll play the game with some other people. But I've looked the rules over. I don't have the hardback books, but there's all kinds of rules you can find online. It's not going to be my first choice. If I want to play Dungeons and Dragons, that's not going to be my first choice of a game. I would choose it over something like the whole Pathfinder D20 and over 4th edition for sure. Not knocking those games either. But if I had to choose one of those 3, that's probably what I would choose, because they've done a really good job, I think, of kind of trying to get all the various camps together and produce a game that's going to kind of appeal to everybody. However, it's just not producing the kind of experience I want. I'm reading the rules, and to me, this is very imperfect analogy. But I just picked up 7C First Edition, which Sebastian is really hot on, which I like it, but it's very different. It's much more over the top than something like All for One. And to me, like 5th edition D&D is to the OSR kind of like what First Edition 7th Sea is to All for One Regime Diabolique. It is just definitely bumped up. It's an imperfect analogy, but still, first thing that came to my mind. And it's something that, like, to quote somebody a little bit, it's kind of almost like fantasy wish fulfillment theater, where it's just your characters are supercharged. And that's not a bad experience, but it's not always the experience I want. I think maybe if I wanted a more supercharged, D&D experience, maybe I would play 5th edition with some people. But for me, when I roll dice and I get in that mindset, that's not necessarily what I want. So, very long video, longer than his, to kind of respond to him, and talked about a lot of topics I've talked about before. But I just, I really enjoy watching his channel and watching where he's at, because I identify so much. So I just kind of want to put my 2 cents in about this topic. And hopefully we generate a dialogue. How about that?